Hello, everyone, and welcome to our last panel of this edition of SolariseCon. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves because surely I have been. It's been such a fabulous day. I'm Steph. I'm a science fiction and fantasy writer, a design research specialist, and a long-time activist for an open, equitable, accessible, and user-friendly World Wide Web. I'm your moderator for this final panel titled What's Holding Us Back from a Better Tomorrow?, where we're going to dissect the nuances of narratives and how we construct them. And with me here are wonderful panelists, and I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves to you. And maybe I will start with Phoebe. Would you mind?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. Thanks, Steph. And thank you all for being here today. I'm Phoebe Wagner. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently a settler on the traditional homeland of the Susquehannock and Lenni-Lenape people in Williamsport, Pennsylvania in the US. And I'm part of the editing duo for Sunvault, Stories of Solarpunk and Eco Speculation, and then another collection that's forthcoming, Almanac of the Anthropocene, a compendium of solarpunk futures. But I'm also a writer. I do my editing, and I'm also an academic, and I'm currently an assistant professor of creative writing at Lycoming College. So that's a little about me.
Thank you, Phoebe. Lex, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Lex Beckett. I am also a science fiction and fantasy writer. I write near-future solarpunk books under the name LX Beckett. And my most recent of those are Game Changer and Deal Breaker. And I also write eco-fantasy as A.M. Della Monica. What else can I say? In my day-to-day life, I also write a lot of articles about ecological and sustainable engineering projects, which is just extremely handy for writing books about the same thing.
Roberto,
yeah, go ahead.
I'll let you one of you go.
My name is Roberto Andres, and I am a co-founder of FEN, which is ecological film production. We like to call ourselves. We are focusing on creating films with the most minimal environmental footprint. And in this journey now, slowly we've been incorporating solarpunk narratives into the stories that we want to tell. And we actually been doing slowly but surely interested in more and more. And our last short film actually had some mentions about it. And so, yeah, that's who I am, JP.
Okay, I am like the other part of FEN. Like me and Roberto, we are brothers. I'm the other co-founder of this film company. I am an illustrator, writer, activist, like organizer of events, like everything always like focusing sustainability, like our connection with nature, also like with like different subjects like derivated from like trying to create like a better world or like a better planet for the future. But like, yeah, this is why I'm from Pablo.
Thank you, everyone. So there's an increasing awareness over the last few years on the power of narratives and how they shape our perspectives, whether positive or negative. For example, how voters choose to vote, or how an Overton window may shift on a politically sensitive topic. I'm not going into details. I think there's plenty of examples we can all think of in our local to our context. In a way, I like to think that that's why we're here. We've recognized that we need positive narratives to imagine the better future that we need to get behind so that we can cultivate hope and also cultivate sort of the path towards that future. For some reason, the number of such stories in mainstream culture is very limited. And for me personally, this raises the question, is our tool set limited? Spoiler, if I didn't think it was, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. So it feels to me that we may have a little disconnect in our story forms. Solarpunk, for example, needs to do with communities and societies, and sort of like the artists in the last panel talked about this. And so, actually, I think we've touched on the concept of communities in every single panel so far today. Our story structure at best at the moment in mainstream deal with a clutch of heroes, maybe at best, trying to fight one big evil organization, and not much more than that in terms of different structures. So, and I feel like, especially Western story structure, which is also, quite insidious and everywhere, is inherently conflict-driven, hero-centric, and that sort of stuff they continue to teach us how to write in workshops is those kinds of stories. And also perhaps the type of stories that we'll drop out on might just be inadequate to deal with the complexities we should address in the world we need to change. I see a couple of nods already, which is a good sign, because if you disagree with me, that would be interesting as well. Maybe Lex, would you like to take us forward? What issues do you see with our current narratives that may help or hinder us in this reimagination of the future?
Right. Well, okay, so Deal Breaker and Game Changer are thrillers, so they do actually have quite a plot-driven backbone wrapped around what I think is a really nice, compelling solarpunk near future. And I grew up on those narratives you're talking about, those sort of standard structure, conflict-driven stories, and I really like them. And when I started to come further towards solarpunk from the eco-fantasy writing I was doing, it was in part a reaction to the big trend in dystopian and post-apocalyptic fiction, and my strong feeling that those narratives both negate hope and encourage people to sort of rescind responsibility for doing anything about our collective ecological problems, because they say there's nothing you can do, so don't do anything. And I immediately did find that pitching optimism didn't always get traction. And I feel it's not only that we aren't accustomed to writing those sorts of stories, it's also that we have a sort of collective worldview that we see in the news, where they say if it bleeds, it leads, right? Where it's sort of just generally assumed that upbeat news stories are not as effective at gaining people's imaginations and attention. I think there's a kernel of truth to that. I think because we are animals at heart, we pay more attention to things that feel threatening. And even in stories, conflict creates enough of a friction to make us pay that kind of attention. But I also think that we can change those narratives, and that sometimes the evolution is slow. And the thing I really often think about is how much televisual storytelling has changed over my lifetime. How TV used to be these discrete episodic pieces that would run for 18 episodes over a season and not really have much connection at all. And then ARC television started to develop, and now we're in this sort of age of on the verge of maybe being into post-prestige television. And we're seeing more story forms and more optimism coming out of that already. And I think the same thing can happen in novels and fiction and be really deeply compelling, especially because we do also really like novelty.
I think I'd love to have a view from JP or Roberto here in terms of narratives, because I guess you, from a film perspective, you do it slightly differently too.
Yeah, it's we also I feel like we also we start to see this really apocalyptic narrative in the world. You see the news and everything is terror and violence. You see all the movies are about zombies or the end of the world, or meteors coming to the planet to just destroy humanity. And I feel that was our first kind of about all of this filmmaking situation, because they were just keep portraying these situations in a really chaotic way. And our project, our film project, it was already super solarpunk in a way, because we were actually doing the filmmaking with solar power, for cameras and lights and everything. And I remember I don't know, it was in 2020 or something like that, when we crashed into solarpunk. And it was for us, it was wow, we just realized about we've been solarpunks for 10 years now, and this exists, and there is a community and a aesthetic, and there is people writing about optimistic stories from the future. And we were okay, wow, this is what we also trying to do in a way. And this was a really a huge drive for us to start to change from this planetary narrative about the end of the world, and start to become inspiration for others in a way. I feel this is this is what we do as artists. We are brave enough to imagine different futures or perspectives, and we inspire others to more intelligence than us, for example, to create this like, I don't know, like futuristic like gadgets or like instruments, you know. So like basically like, I don't know, for me it's like more about like the dream, you know, like to be able to dream in big and like envision the future in a different way in order to create this like structures, narratives that they will take our humanity like beyond, you know, like more outside. I don't know, like I feel like really like Solarpunk has this like, for me, like in this like really apocalyptic world, like the most radical thing like you can do is be optimistic, you know, and this is for me is the core of Solarpunk, is this like radical optimism that is going to drive us to like a better future.
I mean, just to add to that, just to add to that, I mean, we usually with Juan Pablo, we kind of share one mind a little bit. So he's always like, we always find a way, like I see also my words there reflected. And yeah, it is like this kind of just really pushing away this like fear-based narrative that has like, it really like reached all the media, all the mainstream media. It's all about that, you know, and it's all about just, my mom is terrified because she watches too much television. Just because of that, she's just terrified about the world. She's terrified about the end of everything. And it's just like a way also seeing that and saying, okay, what can I do to change this? You know, what is it in my power? And then you realize, oh, well, yeah, I'm a creative. I tell stories, you know. And for us, it was also like this idea that like, because we could be doing like a lot of like documentary work, like as filmmakers, there is tons of documentaries, and there is tons of, you know, really themes that like are being pushed to people to be more aware of social issues, of climate issues. Yet, if I think about the things that have affected my life the most, I can always call back to fiction itself, because it led me to feel feelings and emotions that I didn't know were there, and it led me to see the world in a light that I couldn't imagine otherwise, because it just goes straight to your heart, you know. It's not like this rational thing. It's not like this documentary thing that is telling you like everything that is wrong in the world, you know, and you're so like at the end of it, you feel so weak and so disempowered, because it's like, what am I gonna do to change anything, you know? Like everything is so wrong already. So for us, I was like, okay, we need to do this, but in the fiction way. We need to find a way to almost like subconsciously allow people to imagine something better. And you can tell, and also like trying to get away from this like hero-based narrative of like the great evil, the guy who wants to destroy the world, you know, usually it's a man. But like, you know, kind of like really get away from that and thinking like, okay, what kind of conflicts can we speak about in a Solarpunk future? We can speak about inner conflict. We can still talk about love. We can talk about romantic comedies. We can do, like different kinds of like coming of age. I love coming of age movies, you know, just like growing into your own body, growing into your own feelings, growing into your own experiences. You can do that in a Solarpunk future, and you're just like almost like throwing all these little gadgets here and there and environments, and just like just really unconsciously like allowing people to see something different, something better. So yeah, I give it to Phoebe.
Phoebe.
Yeah, so something I've been thinking about a lot, and this kind of goes to what Roberto was just talking about with the hero narrative, is actually just backing up a little bit to the institutionalization of this type of narrative. It's something I've been thinking about from with teaching my own creative writing students, is particularly in the US when it comes to Western narratives. Creative writing education, I think, is really a hindrance to trying to tell these stories, because we are taught a certain way to tell stories. And that goes all the way back to even when creative writing education was really formalized in the US through the Masters of Fine Arts, the MFA, which was the Iowa Writers Workshop in the 1930s. And that also received like funding from the CIA. Like the CIA was involved in all of this. So there was a specific goal when thinking about teaching creative writing to produce a certain narrative that supported individuality and American nationalism. And that's also sort of where English departments were coming from in the US post-World War II, was to create an American literary canon. that would sort of establish an American identity. And that's like, you can think of one of the things that was supported by that was individualism, right? And this hero-centered narrative. And I think Hemingway is probably one of the very quick people that come to mind when we think about this. And so then when we think about the amount of writers in the US and abroad too that have been touched by the MFA program, or just institutionalized creative writing programs through undergraduate or even workshops, like that's a huge portion of this current generation of writers that have been influenced by this system that the US government had a huge hand in to like institutionalize. So I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how to undermine this idea and how to move away from this, but also still give my students a chance to see their work published if that's the route they want to go. Because I mean, a lot of publishing has obviously been heavily influenced by this as well. So in my mind, I've been thinking about two areas when talking about this with my students too. And if you're interested in this, a book that I really recommend that kind of touches on this is Craft in the Real World. It's one of my favorite workshop books. Yeah, I assign it in my workshops all the time, but would highly recommend it. And they kind of break that down a little bit. Yeah, and the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop is another one too. That's really good. So highly recommend these. But one of the ways I've been trying to think about it in my own writing and trying to talk to my students about it is thinking about individuality and agency, because that's such, US ideals that we see come up in fiction. And I think Solarpunk's a great way to react to this. But that's also something that we need to, as Solarpunk writers and creators, keep in mind that, that's the story that's comfortable, is the hero-centric, individual, agency-based narrative that's been institutionalized in Western culture. So one way I do this is I try to write from, I've been using a lot of first-person plural point of views to kind of try and write from a community rather than an individual person. But then too, there's struggles with that too. Like, I don't think I could keep that up for a novel personally. I know there are writers who do, but I don't think I could. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but I think it's just important to remember that context, that this is really pushing against a very like an institutionalized way of telling stories. And I think that's one reason it's hard to tell a Solarpunk story, and one reason it's still developing so much as a genre. So.
Thank you. And like, there is, so I wonder though, like I sometimes worry whenever I catch myself in thinking like, there's a problem with this, with X. There's a problem with X, hero-centric stories, but maybe there are positives as well. And I sort of like question myself, am I like too far the other way? And should we be evaluating it? I don't know whether we should always do this in a balanced way, but it's pausing in myself. It's like, critically think about it. Are there positives to the hero-centric stories as well as, compared to the negatives? Lex, do you want to go?
Sure. I want to pick up on what Phoebe said and say that, one really great way to go is sort of a hero who is a community. And I definitely write, like, when I'm writing novel length works, they're almost always big cast pieces with lots of characters who are a unit and who are having their internal stuff sometimes mirror whatever they are also working against in the world. And I've been heavily influenced in this because I don't actually watch a lot of American media at all. And since the pandemic, I don't really watch any English language media or consume that much of it either. But I've watched a lot of Korean media. And in Korean media, even when you sort of have a lead or sometimes a lead romantic couple, like almost all those stories come back to everyone in the story. The wrap-ups are kind of long and leisurely, and it's partly because they have to tell you where the entire community has come. And I really like that kind of storytelling, because this idea that, a person goes off and does a important thing by themselves is such what's our profanity? That's the question I always forget to ask. Can I just say horseshit? It reflects such a particular kind of point of view that is really exalted in a lot of pop culture and really nonsense. Like, none of us is where we are today, wherever that is, because we just did stuff. And I like communities as heroes. It gives you that drive of people the reader can relate to, and enough of them that they can pick and choose and find something in themselves to kind of relate to. And it gives you complexity because your characters ideally can almost be a super organism. But but at the same time, it you don't lose the things that are really compelling about narratives where someone is striving. We like striving. And we have a lot to strive for right now. So
I'm going to ask JP or Roberto to pick this one up.
I think for me it's about like this. I thought about this also before in the panel that was talking about energy and how there was a question regarding, what are we gonna do about like the mining of minerals to get like the solar panels working, and like all the lithium and here and it's like, are we gonna make all the deserts empty in the world, and then we have another issue, if we go like super into solar energy. And I think that for me the only answer to that is like, well, we always have to keep this like critical thinking. We always have to keep constantly challenging the status quo. So taking that application to this question, I think, we have to do more collective community stories, focus stories, but not because of that we're gonna like completely like scrap the hero's journey, because the hero, maybe not the hero journey, but the I feel like, I mean, maybe it's a spiritual level, like what happens outside is always a reflection of what's happening inside, So you can tell a story of what's happening to a community through what is happening to one person. Therefore, you can make it more relatable to somebody per se. Something that I've noticed in my own life is that whenever I try to talk a lot about a lot of things, it can get a bit hard for people to follow what am I really talking about, and there's so many layers and dimensions to what I'm saying, that then it's like the message itself kind of gets lost a little bit. So in that sense, the idea of having a character that embodies this journey, it's more helpful to get the story across and get people to feel and to empathize with that. But I do feel like we definitely I don't think we need to continue this like one white man saves the world. I'm totally like not for that in any way, But I do believe that we can continue to use this narrative, but in a different way, and allow the criticism and allow the evolution of that narrative itself, and power it with new, more collective narratives, community narratives, the journey of a community and so forth. So that's kind of how I'm standing there.
Yeah, true that. I was like also thinking, because like lately, like me and Roberto were working in this, like we want to make these like Solarpunk capsules for the summer, like really like short, like 3-minute short stories in which like we imagine like things in the future. And the other day I went to the lake and I was sitting down over there like trying to think, like I was like, okay, like in this Solarpunk future, what people will protest for, which like what will like be the things that will make like somebody who lives like like in this perfect society to go on the streets and to like have a scream for it, or like what would be like the perspective of love, because like I mean, like at the end, like Solarpunk in a way is also like it's about like really connect with nature, like become like nature, be surrounded by this like also like the natural circles of nature, like the diversity of nature, like all of these like social aspects that are embraced in this like this connection that we actually have from Mother Nature in a way. And in this ways, I was like trying to think or like imagine like, okay, like how will people start to love if this like eco-affectivity change in the relationship that we have? Because like I feel like also like capitalism in a way is making like everything like a consumption object, like love is something that you consume, bodies are something that you consume, like nature, technology, everything is a consumption, religion is a consumption, spirituality is a consumption, like yoga is a consumption, like everything is something that you just like take to yourself and don't give like everything back. And I do feel like if we are trying to like build these like new narratives about like how we use our resource, this like love and emotions are also like resource, so we also start to like managing our emotions and our like intelligence in a different way. And I don't know, like for me this is like really, really challenging, because like it's like really like a process of like deconstruction of a lot of things that I take for granted because I'm like based in this like reality. and then like try to give like another turn to it, like say, okay, like, wow, like what is like how I would love like other human beings in when I don't have this like sense of possession or like like capitalist or like love, so like for me this is like how like you really change like this from this like hero self-based narrative, into like different stories, because you have to like find a space to create like something which is stop being linear, because there is no consumption on it. More cyclical.
That's
exactly.
really interesting connection in terms of like the concept of that sort of hero-centric story and consumption. Phoebe, would you like to pick up on that?
Yeah, and I think I want to pick up with what Juan Pablo was saying too, is that I think that's a strength too of the hero-centric narrative, is it's comfortable, right? This is our current worldview, and there is power in telling a story that has that comfort level to it. And I think probably like I know one of my comfort movies that I'll go back to is like a Star Wars movie or a Marvel movie, and it's because it is familiar. It feels good when I watch it. And I think as long as we're aware of that, like you were saying, deconstructing, if we're aware of that, that can be a really powerful tool in our writer's toolbox. So I think that's one of the potentially like positives of a hero-centric story, is that level of familiarity to it. And as long as you're aware of that, it just can be a really powerful tool to bring awareness, to show someone shifting their own viewpoint in the story. There's a lot of different ways that you can play around with it. But first, I think, comes that awareness. So.
Lex, you wanted to pick up on something in specific?
Yeah, I was so excited when you said like what would people protest in a solarpunk future, because I think it's really easy to assume that all solarpunk narratives are necessarily utopian, but if we're assuming they are human societies, that's just never going to be a story problem. Like that idea of the completely imbalanced utopia, and I thought a lot about this when I was writing Game Changer, because I was trying to imagine a world that like our grandkids would be willing and happy to live in, like where we would lose some things and give up some things, including many capitalism things, but where we wouldn't necessarily have to give up being interconnected in this wonderful way. Because like, I don't think any of us want to lose our fabulous internet toys, or having homes, or, getting to eat. But one of the things about that future is the food's not good, and you don't have total reproductive rights. So one of the things that gets protested in my future is that there are reproductive controls. Pets are almost not allowed unless they are service animals, and people generally, if they want a kid, they have to live in a polyamorous relationship and apply. So every kid has 5 or 6 parents, and then one of the kids in the story is this weird rarity, this outlier who 2 of their parents have died and one of their grandparents has died, and their other parents are getting divorced, and they're like the only kid they know in the world who actually only has 1 parent, which creates baggage for the next book. And this isn't like to brag about my thing, but when I was building that future, the other thing I saw was that even if we like miraculously pulled everything in and we got it into a really great space, like in 2080, 50 years down the road, somebody would have been dissatisfied enough to pull everything out of balance, trying to get something they wanted. And I think that is always going to be an aspect of human society, is that we'll get to what feels like a steady state, and many people will benefit. And then the people who are on the losing end, or who feel they aren't winning enough in some cases, will start trying to drag us in another direction, and balance will inevitably tilt. I think that's a lot.
Does anyone want to respond to that before we change?
I think it talks about this, like the duality of the human being. Like there is, no matter what we do, there's gonna be duality. It's part of our human nature. If there's love, there's gonna be hate, yin yang. It's just like it's always this constant story, and I guess, like for example, in the case that like Juan Pablo, although we don't like strive for, I think utopia can be a bit boring, perhaps, but we want to get as close to that as possible, and yet still keep duality, because it's a really like important like storytelling and also tool that we have. And in that case, you have, for example, like stories that could deal with this idea of perhaps one way to like dealing with duality itself is like accepting it, accepting that we are going to disagree, and maybe there is a story there, and I think there's always going to be something, and you always, I think for these stories, you always have to keep something a little that it hasn't been completely like certainly perfect, or hasn't been taken to this point that we're all agreed that, this is beautiful, this is great, let's keep it that way. Like, no, there's always going to be detractors, even in the rich societies today, that there's some towns that look like Solarpunk futures, in the world already, and they still have issues. There is still a level of inequality, and so I think
sorry, and I think that there is so many stories there. Like, there is so many stories from now to utopia, like in between, like what happened in between, like who died, who was born, who created this like magic technology that reshaped like human consciousness. Like there is so much space until like you get to the top, and then like when you get to the top, there is also like so much space to going like down, because like at the end it's still part of this like duality, like black and white, like feminine and masculine, these like forces that we have like in basic, like in nature and reality. They are always like trying to like balance themselves in a way, and like and I feel like there is so much there to like really to explore. Like there's like we have this idea with Roberto, because we saw one time this like there was like this like algae like technology, like now they have like big like ponds full of like algae, and these like algae are able to like clean the waters, and this is like a big massive scale. Then I was thinking with Roberto, was saying like imagine this technology in like 50 or 100 years, so you will have like a glass, who is like made, it has like a small alga device that you can just like pick up like water from the river, and this like device will just like clean it like inside of your own like container, so like I feel like there is like a lot of this to explore in order to how we get from like pre-Solarpunk to like Solarpunk, and then like maybe to post-Solarpunk, and then like who knows what is coming like after that, like, and this is for me is like super interesting.
That takes us to a really nice segue, because I know that we were talking about like lots of things around the elements of Solarpunk stories, but I wanted to ask each of our panelists, when you think about Solarpunk stories, is there particular elements that come to mind for you? Like, are there examples that either inspired your own writing, or where did you begin? Phoebe, would you like to go?
Yeah, so I'm happy to. So I know this has been discussed at length, it sounds like, in multiple panels. I know I was listening in on one and it was coming up too, but communities, I think community is like at the center of Solarpunk for so many folks. And I also want to echo something that was talked about in the previous panel, like, is Solarpunk just another style? It was Commando was talking about like hyper local, like really local communities. And that's something I think about a lot with Solarpunk, is how can I tell a story out of the community I'm currently in, or the environment I'm currently a part of, and how can that story grow out of there? What are the needs of that, and what are the stories that are already occurring that maybe I can just figure out a way to responsibly write down and record. And I think too, something that comes to mind more and more for me with Solarpunk is thinking about multi-species connections, and thinking about like the more than human, and just continuing to move from like the individuality of just the human, and that concept that we've really developed of the human as an individual, into something that is more accurate to what's actually going on in the human body, and also to the human as part of a larger environment. And that's something that was really exciting to see in the multi-species cities anthology that came out from World Weaver Press. Was it last year, I believe? Yeah, I think 2021. And so that's a really great example. A lot of the stories in there were really wrestling with this idea, in addition to making really interesting urban stories as well. So that's some things that that really come to mind when I think about Solarpunk, and I've been tossing around and reading about. So,
who would like to go next? I'll nominate Lex.
Well, I live in this this stew of articles about technology we're developing to get to, first of all, because we had been thinking so much about net zero. People still talk about getting to net zero on carbon, but really we've reached the point where we have to start really pushing to get well beyond that very fast. And it is intriguing and humbling because the engineers I tend to work with don't necessarily have a political take on it. They really just have a technical take on it. And I often feel like what I wrote that I was so proud of and is amazing is already behind. Like I hear them talk, and they're not really worried about our energy problems. Like they feel like they have the tech to sort out making enough electricity for people, but they're starting to be really, really not starting, but like the way they talk about water, for example. You're like, oh, wow. And it's sort of that kind of always rolling over. But when I started on the universe that I've been talking about a bit, that most of my Lex Beckett work is sort of situated in, it began with internet shamings, which I was really interested in the time, and how those communities act to sometimes just profoundly isolate people who haven't done anything so terribly wrong that they deserve to be scapegoated. What the first steps for communities like the ones I live in, which are almost always, Canadian cities, would be like, what happens when urban communities in the West start really trying to move themselves beyond the lifestyle that we have. And I'm interested in that because we know that people who live in cities have a lower carbon footprint. But our desire to live near nature and access nature and protect nature is often stronger if we are near nature. So there's this disconnect there. So I started by imagining this future like 20 years out from here where, the city gives you incentives to grow bamboo in your backyard that is going to go to a carbon sink. And, you're starting to have a much more formalized version of the social internet where if you're doing ecologically incorrect things, then you might get scapegoated, but in a way that maybe is slightly regulated. And then I spun that out a couple of centuries. So in some ways, it's just really what's happening right around me. And in other ways, it's like what science articles have just come in the door. And it's really hard to pick out what specific thing has hit my eyeballs that has sparked the most interest. But I do really remember the internet shamings being huge for me at the time that I wrote the first novella.
Roberto, you want to go next?
Yeah. For like, I don't know, for me, like it all started with this. I think with all the visuals and all the. I was really happy before seeing the panel from before because like all the artists that were like that were talking, I saw their work on Instagram, and I was like, wow, this like really cool that like I get to like kind of be in this area where like I can also like hear their thoughts and where that came from. Because that in one's head as another person, it transforms into and it creates like a whole new world, and like maybe completely abstracted from what the original artist intended to do. And so I don't know, like for me, like the elements of the Solarpunk universe are, as Juan Pablo mentioned it before, they can span in 80 years, in 100 years, So in the beginning, there is a lot of activism. There is a lot of a little bit of like eco-terrorism, and a lot of like different elements that will like play a big role in changing the future and the creation of new technologies and what's not. But then there's going to be also a period where filled with a lot of catastrophe that is already pending and it's already kind of on its way. Like that. I mean, even if we like radically change like the way in which we are like using energy and consuming right now, tomorrow there's still going to be like 10 years ahead that there's going to be the fruits from the damage that we've already did. So there's also this like elements, you will see like cities flooded, and new ways of community to live in the cities, so this kind of like using the space in a different way and organizing ourselves in a different way through catastrophe, because of catastrophe. This has happened many times. We're from Chile, and this like the earthquakes are kind of like, there's always something new that comes out of every earthquake. There's always a new technology or a new understanding of how to organize ourselves. And but then going beyond, after all the new artifacts and all the new technologies and all the ways of like organizing ourselves, then the stories that I'm like really interested in seeing are the, like, thinking about this, like so like Lex mentioned that we have to go beyond, like net zero. We have to go into full-on regenerative practices. We have to go full-on into sequestering carbon, full-on into like recovering the environment. We have to go full-on into healing the planet as a collective race, or the human beings and what's not. So the part that I'm most interested in the Solarpunk narrative, and I guess Juan Pablo, we can agree with this, is that once we do the work of becoming the regenerators of the earth, the healers of the earth, what does that allows, like to a spiritual level, where does that leave? Where does that leave you? I mean, imagine this: like you go from being the species that was destroying the world to be the species that like allow it to thrive. If you get that power, if you like really connect to that kindness and that thriving sense, then there is so much space for completely different conversations, completely unimaginable conversations, as Juan Pablo was saying before. So this is for me, it's the most interesting. It's like way beyond all these things. It's like this really close to utopia, really, but still, duality. But yeah, I don't know if JP wants to add something there.
You say like everything that I was going to say, so I guess I will just continue with Phoebe.
Go ahead, Phoebe.
Yeah, I actually wanted to circle back to something Lex said earlier about technology, because I think for a lot of people, Solarpunk stories do have that connection to technology, which I think can be really awesome and really fun, but it also, I think, can sometimes skew some of the work that needs to be done now when we're thinking about technology that is not able to exist in like any format. And there's definitely space for that in Solarpunk, and it's super fun. And I think there's a spectrum to that. But one way that I've been thinking about technology, particularly for the moment we're kind of in right now, where we do have access to technology for like the energy, like Lex brought up, is that I sort of reconceive of technology as tools rather than like new technology, because sometimes we already have the tools and we don't need to necessarily focusing on like shiny new technology all of the time. And something actually when my co-editor and I were conceiving of Sunvault in the first sort of general Solarpunk anthology is what we were trying to create with that. We were really careful with our call for submissions, and we're trying to be really thoughtful about how we wrote it. And the way that we phrased it was stories of those inhabiting the leverage points, the crucial moments when great change can be made by the right people with the right tools. And I think that's something I've always kind of gone back to, is that it's not always brand new technology. Sometimes it's just the right tools in that right moment. And I think that's something to keep in mind, not to just only be focusing on new technology, but to also be able to come back and think about what are the right tools. Is it technology we already have? Is it older technology that communities before us have created and used already? Or is it something new that needs to be designed and needs to be created and imagined? So I think there's a whole spectrum that is part of Solarpunk.
Thank you. Now, I think I've seen some sort of like people are asking or chatting about this. There was someone who posted earlier about how do we tackle this in terms of like technically, do we like have different points of view per chapter type thing? So I was wondering, because like it sounds to me as creators, you also write in other genres and you have explored other genres. What is it that you do in Solarpunk that you do differently compared to, say, if you write, high fantasy, cyberpunk, or different films for JP and Roberto? So yeah, I don't know. Who would like to go first? Actually, keep it open.
For me, it's like I really feel like I feel like, I don't know, like cyberpunk or like zombie movies or like these catastrophe movies or whatever like they already done like everything, like in this way, like what I really like about Solarpunk, that is so new and there is so space for imagination that like you can really go wild just by collecting just a little of like information about like new technologies that they are like currently being developed, you know, and like you can really go wild with it, you know, and like really use it like in a different way. Like when I remember when I read like Solarpunk Summers, I was like there was stories about like this like people who's eating like insects, you know, and like then like this girl was making the insect like bigger, and then she was like developed certain relationship with the insect, so she was not eating insects, so it was like basically like a vegan insect person. And for me, it was like, wow, like this idea is crazy, you know, like really, like it's like taking things that we already have in like problems in our like society, or like things that are happening, like they're never gonna start to like happen, you know, like we're always gonna deal with grief, we're gonna kind of love, we're always gonna wanted to like explore, you know, we're explorers. Like it was like super interesting what Roberto was saying about like this like concept of like regeneration, you know, and like healing the earth. And like because we have like I don't know, like the chance to pass from being like colonizers to become like healers, you know, and like I don't know, this can really change the entire like aspect of like stories that you can write from a perspective. It happens a lot in filmmaking that when you put the camera up and when you put it down, like the image looks different depending on where you're putting your attention to it, you know. So like I guess like in Solarpunk stories it's the same. Like where you put your attention is where you can create like more like wild or like new stories or like even like new narratives for the world.
Roberto, do you have more to add on approaches to different creating
yeah, I
stories?
mean, it's like what Juan Pablo said. It's this space to bring something completely fresh, and I think like in the end that's what happens here. I think the main difference when I am writing Solarpunk versus writing anything else is that it takes me much longer to be satisfied with it, I guess. Like I mean, it takes me, you know, it's challenging. It's very challenging to like write a story without like just using the same antagonists and using the same vehicles of attention and using the same narratives, you know, and like writing stories that, you know, you don't want to like, you know, like it's not gonna be like any explosions maybe, you know, or like, so I think that's when I realized, okay, this is a Solarpunk story, because okay, this is taking me a while to nail down, and the reason why it's taking me a while to nail down is because like there's barely any reference point, you know, there's barely any reference point. Like we've had like all the Solarpunk books. Sunbelt is also there, so thank you Phoebe for that. But so there's really little like narratives that are going in this direction, so you always have to think like super fresh, and that's the main question at the end. It's like, okay, does this feel fresh enough? Does this feel different enough? And then okay, if it does, yeah, okay, that's Solarpunk. So yeah.
Phoebe or Alex, whoever want to take this up.
I don't mind jumping in. Or Lex, do you want to?
Oh, go ahead. I was remembering that there was a question about, you know, what do you do differently, and I was like, I've thought about this now.
Yeah.
I had time to think about it.
I want to echo so much of what Roberto said. Like, you have summed up my struggles, my daily writing struggles. Like, it is, for those of people that are trying to write Solarpunk, especially, like if you're having this struggle, like we're all having this struggle, you know, and it's partially because of exactly what you said, Roberto. It's, you know, it's not a ubiquitous form of storytelling like we're used to. And just the freshness too that you mentioned. I'm always trying to search for that when I'm writing Solarpunk. So yeah, I just wanted to echo that struggle. And to say too, I think my approach to writing Solarpunk stories and the way that it differs is that I have to pull away from the action. So my debut novel is an urban fantasy novel set in Reno, and I have like a magical nuke go off at one point. Like, this is a fun, fighty, like romp and stomp book around the, you know, the high desert of Nevada. And so it's very different than obviously what I try to achieve in my Solarpunk books, even though I do have environmental aspects to that novel. And that's just I love consuming those stories as well. But one of the things that's so different is really when it comes to when I'm sitting down to write the character. And a lot of the Solarpunk stories I write, that character that I'm in their point of view has grown up in a world or is experiencing a world that is so different than the kind of world I grew up in, just from an ideological point of view, that it comes down to even like word choice. Like I'm working on a Solarpunk novella that's coming out from Android Press, and I know I'm gonna have to go back through and just search for all these like sort of capitalist-based words, like spending time, and just trying to edit all of that out because the character would not conceive of the world in that way. And so it's really even down to just small things like that, to how they look, how this character would look at a tree or a forest in a way that I don't see. And so, yeah, it's just so different, just in little things like that, compared to when I sit down to write my, work on my urban fantasy, where that character is very similar to the ideology I grew up in. And so that's like a different comfort level in that character. So that's one thing that's big for me, is just being in characters' heads is such a different experience for a Solarpunk story versus maybe something else I'm working on, like urban fantasy.
Something you'll find when that novel goes into editorial is all of those cultural assumptions that your character has. Your editor will be like, wouldn't they just? And there's a lot of it, because it is there is sometimes a disconnect there too. I've spent a lot of time trying to sort of find the point of view space between where we are now as isolated individuals who spend a lot of time engaging with the internet, and a future where we're even more connected, but not quite at the point of telepathy. A lot of my futures, one of the ways that people consume fewer hard goods is they own a lot more virtual real estate. So they have the mansion equivalent of Zoom, and they visit with their friends, in a nice virtual space. And this is something that's starting already to become available to us. I go hunting orcs with a bow and arrow in VR with a friend in Germany every weekend. And that technology is only going to get better, to the point where we're actually going to feel like we're hunting orcs, a couple decades from now. And it's kind of mind-boggling. But even a few years ago, when that first book came out, it was right before the pandemic, and the question I got asked most in interviews was, do you really think people would socialize this way? Like, would they hang out together like in basically the futuristic equivalent of internet chat rooms? I was like, I think so. I think if they didn't have a choice, they would. So those super interconnected systems of people they're not quite telepathy, but there's an idea that you almost always have access to your network, that everyone who's awake is someone you might touch base with, or who might like stick their nose in and say, don't wear that dress. Or probably not that, but how your family will nag at you. But in this case, your family is like your close friends list. And they all feel like they have a stake in what you're doing. So it's not quite a collective consciousness, but it's not quite the same view of individuality that we have either. And it's fun to write that kind of thing, where a lot of the voices that are around you are not necessarily physically located near you, and where you really never are alone. So.
Thank you. So after all we talked about the challenges, and I also think like the amount of time that it took me to write a cyberpunk story versus solarpunk story, I just don't want to do the math. It's so scary. But like telling these kind of complex community-centric stories, I'm going to like sort of mush this together as one big question, because I think if I take it apart, it might just be too granular. So like, how can we do them better? And in my head, I'm thinking like, there's been a couple of good examples lately, particularly in animated film, and also one of them just came out, independent films, on intergenerational trauma, and that we haven't. I'm just picking up on something that Roberto said. He didn't use those words, but it was what you described. So like the intergenerational trauma from climate change, and I think Lex, you also mentioned that, a little bit of that, and that on top of that, because that's complex, but there's also that inclusivity angle in terms of having a diverse cast, and having to some degree I feel like, certainly for myself, I'll start with this, and it'd be interesting to hear you. Like when I try to write a Solarpunk story, it's very much like I'm having to learn about someone's, not just their worldview and ideology, but the entire life experience. If I'm trying to write from somebody in the culture different from mine, so it's not just time and space; it's time, space, and the other dimension that I don't have a name for. I'm just going to throw it out there and make it really hard for our panelists. I don't know, Phoebe, would you like to talk about how do we deal with these type of complex challenges when we talk about these kind of all the things?
Yeah, and I think it's certainly very difficult. I mean, I think we were all just talking about that. And one of the struggles, I think, with a community-centric story and thinking about these struggles too of having a diverse community is that your story almost has to become longer and longer and longer with all of these sort of characters coming together. And if it's a short story, which a lot of Solarpunk is short stories still, we're seeing that shift into novellas and novels. But then that becomes harder and harder to sell. And unfortunately, we all live in a capitalist world where we're trying to sell our stories. And so then that becomes like a publishing issue as well. If I have this 7,000 word story, because I have this diverse community that I'm writing about, that narrows markets down. And the same thing happens with books. You have, if you have 6 point of view characters, suddenly your novel's very much longer, and so I think that's one of the struggles, but also that's one of the beautiful things about Solarpunk is the opportunity to do that. And I know one thing I have to struggle with is reconciling that if I'm going to do this right, it's probably not going to go to a top market that I really want to land, and that's totally fine. And I can reconcile that, but I think that's one of the problems that comes too with writing in this way is that our narrative, like the Western narrative that I was kind of talking about earlier, doesn't necessarily allow a lot of avenues for these stories to get out then. At least that's kind of what I've been wrestling with and seeing. And so, yeah, that's one of the struggles. And then I think too, I want to go back to the idea of hyper locality. I think Solarpunk is a really special place or special genre in the fact that we can write about where we're at now. And so for authors that are, I try to figure out how to say this. For authors that are just starting out with Solarpunk, I would really encourage you, write about the community write about that community because you're going to have access to it and the chances of getting it right are going to probably go up. So you have that access and you have that interest, and that's just going to help you be able to tell the story in the right ways, in my opinion. So that's kind of some advice I give to people who are just sort of starting out too. So I don't know how closely I got to all the aspects of your question, Steph, but I'm happy to turn it over to other folks.
That's okay. We can always come back around. I think that's why I wanted to keep it sort of be pretty open. Roberto, would you like to pick up?
Yeah. So I'm thinking that there is this challenge of not knowing exactly how these new generations might feel about this, and I mean we all have different ages here. We all already feel differently about many things, but I feel like in the last years that this idea of like there's so many new ideas that have come into conversation regarding like arts and the way that we create media and the way that we create content. For example, like there's like now more people are talking about the multiverse, because of Marvel, and there's like ways. There's been like a lot of some of my favorite movies are actually these movies where you have like 4 characters and you have like different perspectives from like 4 different characters, like Babel or like Amores Perros or other movies, and then it's like it feels like a universal story. It doesn't feel like it feels like you can do this kind of find ways in which you can tell stories representing different generations, yet talking about the same topic. And just how different generations relate to that topic, and we might not get it right in the way that like how future generations might feel about certain things, but if we have a chance to tell multiple stories, we might get a couple right. I don't know if I get my idea across, but there is a way in which fiction can dare in this journey, because there is so many, like you can tell so many. For example, like with Juan Pablo and I, we're doing this thing of we want to do just like really short content, really like 3 minutes content, because maybe like, you throw 10 out there, and one or two of them I actually become a reality somehow, and somehow they do click with somebody who watches this video in like 2077, and then they're like, oh yeah, wow, damn, somebody thought about this in 2022, so like, just try. And I think the more we dare to tell stories, the more we have Solarpunk stories in books, in movies, in music, even in lyrics, then the more chances of getting it right, more chances of getting close to, because in the end we are co-creating reality. Today we are living a reality that we were writing about 30-40 years ago. We wrote it. The same that our community wrote those stories. So I feel like, a lot of, we're gonna write a lot of stuff, and some of it is gonna be very accurate, and some of it.
I'm really with you in this, like the fact that you really you have to like be really brave and dare yourself to like try to put yourself in the skin, or like with empathy, or like try to like feel the vulnerability of like some other person, like, and I don't know, like for me, this is an exercise that I do like by talking to people which is different from me, it's like, and in this sense, I'm really unapologetic, because I talk to a lot of people, especially like I always try to find like people who's really different from me, and I really like ask them like things that sometimes I feel like I shouldn't ask, but like apparently I have this like power of like people that are really open to me, so like it doesn't cross like any barrier, but I don't know, like I feel like in a way it's like also like, I don't know, like Jack Kerouac or like other like writers that used to go and live their stories, and like then they were writing things that they happened to them. And like for me, like this is like some kinds of like exercise of observation of like other personalities in a way, because I'm also like an actor, so like this is also like a psychological exercise, to like understand like different perspectives or points of view, and then you just are brave. You say, okay, I feel like a person with these conditions or under these methodologies, it will act or decide things in this way, and this is what I will write about it. Like then you will see if like somebody read it and like maybe they hate you because like you were like really like building like your character over a cliche, or they really say like, hey, you know what, like I really feel connected with this character, and I feel like it comes from like a really like a place of vulnerability, and I feel like this space is like really really important, like because especially for me as an artist, in the total aspect of being an artist, I feel like when I'm like more true to myself, or when like people is more related to my stories or to like my art, it's because I'm most honest with what I'm saying, because I'm not trying to harm like anybody by like writing a character. I'm not trying to like angry any culture or like any kind of person. I'm just like writing from my own perspective what can I absorb of reality, and like in this way, like there is like, of course, like there is a frame of like respectful for like everybody you're surrounded, especially in like the Solarpunk culture, but there is also like this space for you to be brave and to decide to say, okay, like this is what I think. It will work for this character, and like then you will see if like people like it or not. But this is at the end is a thing of perception of the other one. So like it doesn't matter. Like you just have to be brave at the end.
Lex?
I think if you're going to write about communities as sort of protagonists or superorganisms or sort of ensemble pieces, it really benefits you as an artist to be honest with yourself about what communities you're in, what you're bringing to them, who's in them, and why they're in your lives. Like a lot of us have a toe in multiple communities, and we keep them all separated from each other. And a little self-reflection about why is that? Like, why can't I take what I do at work to the Pride Parade and be proud of it because I work in capitalism? And what do I show my family about my real life? Like, when we divide up the people in our lives in these ways, I think we should ask, why do we do that? And I think we should look at who is most important to us, and what do we bring and get from those situations.
That is such a profound point, Lex. Thank you. That's going to keep me up at night. So,
Sorry.
no, in a good way. I think it's we've got some really great questions in that people have posted. So I'm going to try and address bring this into our conversation. I want to apologize in advance for not getting to all of them, and also I probably won't ask them in the exact order they were posted, depending on what we've got. So, question to start with. Let me just see if I can show it here. There you are. Do you consider Solarpunk to be a revolutionary or an evolutionary movement? Can we actually fight for a Solarpunk future? Which I think is a great question. I don't know. Who wants to go first?
I will.
Great question.
I would like to go first with this one because I mean, everything is evolution. Revolution is evolution, in a way. I feel like although I mean, I love the concept of revolution, and I think there's gonna be a lot of revolution for Solarpunk to happen. But there's also gonna be a lot of evolution, and I think among those kinds of evolution that we're gonna have is the realization that whenever we fight something, we create more resistance. This is just from a purely a personal understanding of life. That I can say that whenever I try to change something through the destruction of that something, I actually create more resistance. I actually embody that I want to destroy, and that I want to destroy becomes bigger, and it daunts me. It's like a shadow, and I feel like the real work is in transforming things, transmuting, transforming yourself, therefore transforming what's going on outside. I think that's the real revolution. Is more than fighting. Fight is, of course, I'm not saying that fight is not going to happen, and yeah, everything is going to happen. But I think that one of the main things, in my case, should be this idea of transforming the way that we see ourselves, therefore the way that we see others, therefore the way that this reality is created.
Phoebe or
I
Lex?
think that was a great answer.
I think I will jump in a little bit and say I think some of it depends on your definition of fight, right? Because there are revolutions that do not involve fighting in the way that it's often depicted on television or in the movies, or even in exciting books like Star Wars. Obviously, is like an example of one way of thinking about revolution and rebellion and fighting. But at the same time, Solarpunk is anti-capitalist. There's environmental justice aspects to Solarpunk. There's social justice aspects to Solarpunk. And right now in the U.S. in particular, we're seeing moments where there is revolutionary action that is happening, and it has happened in the past. And so I think it's going to be a cycle, as change comes and goes, and, to think about who do we need to protect in our communities and what level of protection is needed in those moments. And that's going to be really community-based and where that needs to happen. So I guess that's kind of maybe, I don't know, just my addition to all the excellent thoughts that have already been said about that.
I agree. I'm not fighting myself, and I never will be. And most of my attempts at revolution or evolution are community based through like groups I'm in that are working toward very achievable specific goals, and because that's then I can see where my impact is.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of stuff with nerd fighters and occasionally with Army, and with my friends here in town who are mostly queers like me who do stuff that I can put my hands on, and
like acting local and thinking globally. It's like, I feel like I mean it's gonna be like, for me it's really like it's gonna be something evolutionary because it also, like how Roberto was saying, we're gonna need a lot of like consciousness to become this like persons that we want to live in this utopia in a way. And this is like it's like a step in evolution in our minds and in our culture and in our respects and way to treat to each other, and who we protect, like we are, what we are protecting. So like for me, it's like not so much revolutionary, because I guess like the word revolution itself is kind of like tricky. But like if I think about evolution, like for me is this word, like it really like reflects what Solarpunk is doing in so many different layers.
Well, yeah, and I think one word that keeps coming up is transformation, right? And that really bridges the gap between revolution and evolution, right? And so I think that is the word that I always come back to with Solarpunk.
Yeah.
This is a question that sort of, I think, segues quite well. And I think we should talk about it because should there be violence in Solarpunk stories? And if not, why? I think it's an interesting one, yeah? We sort of touched on it. I don't know. Lex, would you like to go first? Because you were talking about the fighting scenes.
I write books with a high body count. Violence was a formative part of my young life, and it's never going away. And it comes out in my fiction. But in my current life, no more violence. I think we are all driven to write what we're driven to write. As artists, there's the part we can control and be conscious about, and there's the part that is just going to happen. And I don't like prescriptive formulas for writing. I think writing should be good, and I think it should strive for great things. But I don't like to tell writers, "Oh, you can't do this or you can't do that." So I think there's room in Solarpunk for violence if the story demands it, and I think there's room for no violence in stories. They're wonderful, wonderful stories that don't have any of that kind of conflict, that are still rich and conflicty and chewy and delightful, and nobody dies. But they're not my stories.
Yeah, like I don't know, for me, like I never like until this point really, like I don't address the violence in my Solarpunk stories. Like I don't know, I feel like maybe not yet. I haven't like even like touched that space, but like for me, like now it's all about like philosophy and ideas and like emotions and communication. There's like so much space for creating in this aspect that I'm still like running into it. That for me, like violence would probably be something that if I run up like every other idea, I will say, okay, like I can try to create something more violence, but like maybe it should be, you know, like I don't say it should be, but like for me it's like not happening in, like right now.
Yeah, and I think to sort of jump on that, I think should there be like is violence a necessary aspect of Solarpunk stories? Like, no, I think Lex really summed that up well about how there is this spectrum. But I think it goes back to what does the story need? What type of story are you telling? And because there have been, and I think too, it comes back to maybe even a larger discussion of what the tension of the story is. Because if you have one community coming up against another that has different beliefs, then there is going to be tension. And we've seen that there is violence that comes out of that sometimes. You know, the US is built upon that. And so I think it really depends on the story you're telling. But I think there's space for violence in Solarpunk, but there certainly is space for there to be no violence in Solarpunk.
Yeah, I agree with everybody. I mean, it's in this journey, like if we talk about the next 100 years and being year 100, the one in which we reach the perfect Solarpunk, or the one that we actually are dreaming and striving and want to thrive in, then probably in that story you won't have any violence, but definitely there will be some of that, at least in the early years of that evolution, transformation / revolution.
I'm just going to exercise moderator rights here and just say, actually, there's also different ways of thinking about violence. It's not necessarily just physical violence we need to address, right? There's a lot of violence in that's not explicit in our society today, which I think that actually has a space in Solarpunk stories, because part of what we want Solarpunk stories to tell is to address how we resolve those conflicts and violence. So I think I'm echoing what everyone else has said, but just adding a bit of nuance. Okay, so let's have there is a question which I think is interesting. but so let's see, timing wise, here's a bit of design fiction. What would a whole Earth catalog for Solarpunk look like?
Not sure I know what they mean with whole Earth catalogs.
Yeah.
I was also just Googling that.
Yeah, I'm like literally going into Wikipedia right now.
We're probably showing our age or lives.
The catalog of animals, or like
maybe if the person who posed the question, if you're still there in the chat, you want to give us a little indication of what you were referring to.
The Whole Earth Catalog was an American counterculture magazine and product catalog published between 1968 and 1972, and occasionally until 1998.
It's not like kind of like this house bar like book, like the Germans did this Bauhaus book, in which they were like kind of like this a catalog of like practice or methodologies or like technologies in order to design with certain aesthetic. Like maybe this is why he's trying to address.
Not sure.
I'm not sure. I think we do need a little more.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pause on that, and if we get more, actually, we might run out of time. But this is an interesting one. I'm guessing it's more like yeah. Okay. So let's see. There's one that I think we sort of talked about, but we maybe didn't go quite deep into sort of the techniques of addressing it. So how would you write diverse groups that you may not have connections with, and how do you ensure you present them respectfully? I'm going to tag Phoebe on this one to start with, maybe. Oh, sorry, Roberto.
No. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'll tag Phoebe on this one to start.
So I'm also going to be speaking from my perspective as a cis white woman in the US, which I think is part of the conversation that you should have with yourself to begin with. What is, how do you identify? Where's your identity? What aspects are you trying to write about in a diverse group that maybe you don't have a connection with? And also why you want to write that. I think, yes, we should be writing diverse stories. There's this wonderful book called Writing the Other by Nisi Shawl and Cynthia Ward. And if you're in the speculative writing world, you've probably heard of it. I would definitely recommend buying that book and reading it, because there's really great exercises. And I think that's the really useful part of that book. But one of the things that Nisi Shaw and Cynthia Ward say is, don't shy away from writing diverse characters. You're going to mess up, and that's okay. If you are doing it respectfully and you are approaching it with the right mindset, we need to demonstrate this diverse world. So definitely try and do it. But something too is, why are you writing from this character's point of view? If it is a point of view character, why are you choosing to include this? And, what are you doing also to support communities that maybe you're drawing upon in your fiction that in the real world? So that's something I really counsel my students, and if they want to write from the point of view of, say, an African-American character and they're a white student. I might say, like, what books are you reading, that are written by Black authors? What movies and television are you watching? How are you supporting the art of this community that you want to try and engage with through your own art? And I think that's just a really small step you can take. And really it just depends on sort of what direction you're going with, but definitely doing research, approaching it with the correct, frame of mind, and I would just really encourage, particularly, white authors in the US, which is where I'm coming from, is to think about why you're doing this. Like really have a concrete answer for that. Why are you writing from this group? And why are you writing about this group? And what are the intersections of that? Because there's just so many ways that can kind of, it's not always about intent. You can have the right intentions and still get it wrong. And so just some things to think about. But that's some of the advice that I follow and the advice I give my students when they're sort of struggling with this question as well. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, totally. Like also like investigation, just like don't take things for granted. Talk to the people, connect with them, like empathize with like whatever you want to write to it. there is always like this space of like human connections in which you are able to like really like understand a person from his perspective, and then you can take this to like whatever you're writing. But yeah, but like it's like really like with a lot of respect and like a lot of like space for like open mindedness, and like knowing like also knowing that you can maybe like do it wrong and like like deal with it,
And just to add a little bit to that, what Juan Pablo is saying is like this, like don't be afraid to like get out of your bubble, like burst the bubble, and this is a message that just goes beyond the question, I think. One of the issues that we have as people that are focusing on something as niche as Solarpunk, or something as niche as maybe like sustainable filmmaking or whatever, is that you're gonna encounter at some point that you're gonna be speaking to like an echo-y chamber, like an echo chamber. So you're gonna get like all this feedback, and you're gonna be, oh wow, there's so many people that like are into Solarpunk and stuff. And yes, because you created that bubble in the first place. You've been like just going to these groups, just having these friends, just keeping these people around you because they're talking about the same things about you that you are talking. But we need to stop doing that. We need to stop this bubble formation, because like this is how you are not able to connect with others who are completely on the other side of things and could not even imagine Solarpunk to be a possibility. You have to reach them too. So yeah, it's just like keeping doors open, I think, is the key to talk about diversity, because you yourself become a diversity that embraces diversity, and then that's what it's about in the end. So, like,
cool.
All right. Lex, do you have any thoughts, or shall I move on?
I'm not sure I actually do write about diverse groups I don't have connections with. Like in this world, why not form the connections? Like, why not engage with people who are different from yourself, and find those people and bring enough to those relationships that you can possibly ask them to help you avoid showing your butt in fiction. Is what I would say.
Thank you. So we've got one last question from the audience that I'd like to take, and so I just thought I'd leave the bombshell for the end. Do we need a foundational novel like Neuromancer to take us to break out of as a niche? I'm sure we have opinions here.
I feel like, I don't know, like it was funny because like I've been talking about Solarpunk for the last 2 years to a lot of people, and like every time that I do it, I'm like, okay, I'm like, there is the first time they're hearing about this, and like 2 days ago, or like no, like last week, I went to this event, and like a girl came and she started to talk to me about Solarpunk, and I was like, okay, wow, this is happening, this is getting out of the niche, like this is like we are, I don't know, this is, we only have like 15 years, 20 most of like Solarpunk's concept, aesthetic, architecturally, films, novel, art, whatever, and this is nothing, it's like as a gender, like this is like super short time of like existence, and this is already becoming a like really like huge movement, like really like a lot of people is like Fridays for Future, like Extinction Rebellion, all of these like people are starting to get like like embraced by this like magical and like hopeful future. So like for me is getting outside. Maybe it will like really, it will be like really nice to have like a movie maybe that bursts this bubble, or like a book that does it, and this can like totally happen in the next 2 or 3 years, because like I can see it now. We have like the first like SolariseCon. Like, come on, we are like like we are all like writing and like creating and doing like workshops and talking about this thing. So it's just a matter of time, and this is like really, it's like a quantic jump. It's like 15 years is nothing for a movement to be growing in such a big way as Solarpunk is doing it. So I mean, like it will be like really nice to have this foundational novel, but I don't know. I feel like Solarpunk is actually like breaking the bubble.
And maybe it's supposed to do it in that way, you know, because then if you continue with this, like, need one foundational novel to break it up, then it's just a whole like hero-centric story, you know, the one person that wrote the foundations of the future. But no, this is collective thinking, this is collective work, this is everybody putting their heads together, creating their own Solarpunk universes, and then creating multiple stories about those universes, you know, and we do it together. And like, we don't get to the next level until we are all holding hands and then like jump into the next thing. But like, yeah, it makes sense that it's that it maybe it doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah, I just kind of want to jump in on that, and I totally agree. I think Solarpunk needs to be what each community needs it to be too. So I don't think there can really be a foundational novel, nor should it be. I mean, Neuromancer has its problems that then embedded into the cyberpunk genre, and you know, I think that speaks to one author having sort of that high level of popular culture influence on something. And I think too, the fact that we've seen a lot of anthologies really working to popularize Solarpunk, and then also now like a lot of games and sort of very community-based things that are popularizing Solarpunk. And I think that speaks to it being community-based in a way that a foundational novel can't always do in the same way, like can't bring the voices together like that. And I just kind of want to go back to, you know, Solarpunk is also already being scooped up by academia, and that usually takes forever. So I think that speaks to its popularity as well, that we're seeing, you know, peer-reviewed journal articles coming out about Solarpunk, and we're seeing it at academic conferences. And so the fact that it's reached that sort of high level of institutionalization, in addition to the sort of popular level that we were talking about here, I think speaks that it's spreading very quickly for how short it's really been around.
I don't think Solarpunk needs anything. Like, I think it's, as an art form, it's doing fine. We may get a foundational novel whether we like it or not, right? None of us has any control over which things hit and which things don't. And once they've captured the public imagination, we have no control over what they think they are, or how they conceive them, or how they get adapted. Lots of people are writing Solarpunk books, and they are great. And sooner or later, one of them is just going to explode, probably. Or they will make a Netflix series that is mind-boggling, and everyone will be like, "This is amazing! I want a bunch more of this." That's out of our hands. We can only write the best things we can possibly write, and hope they go into the world and do good.
And with that, I think it's the appropriate time for me to ask each of you, what is your next upcoming publication, release, books, and just real quick, if you can. I'll just go around the table real quick. Roberto or JP, what's your next upcoming film project?
So, I mean, maybe also like open invitation here. Right now, one of our short films is in festival. I'm gonna type the special. It's an online festival, so you can watch it online and you can see our work. And it actually mentions Solarpunk. There's a little hint. So you might enjoy it, everybody. Everybody in this panel might enjoy that film. And right now we are looking into basically creating our own universe, in a way, our own Solarpunk universe, which is going to be a collection of all these little stories, but they're all going to be part of the same transmedia project, in a way. And for that, you can catch us in fen.earth, or website, or on Instagram. I can also write it down here, because it's going to be just something that is going to come and flow through the summer. And I can't spoil much about it, of little short films or little stories about the Solarpunk future that we are envisioning.
Yeah, it's a really nice project, because it's what we were like talking before. It's kind of like we're trying to think in what happened from now to Solarpunk. So like which like historic things happen in from here to there, and like wanted to like show it in like a really like visual and like cute way, and like what kind of conversations was people having in these times, what kind of like experience they were like living. So it's that, and we are working in our also like a short film to do it like in the maybe like in the near August or September. But like we are seeing how it's developing like the entire project. But this is what is coming for us, like more filmmaking.
Thank you, Lex. Quickly, your next upcoming work.
I'm also sort of in the middle of a secret project, but Game Changer and Dealbreaker are quite recent still. they're only sort of newly out and still occasionally doing interviews and stuff for Dealbreaker. And I also had a series of novelettes out set in that same universe, but sort of in the really bad time before things start to get better. So, but they're a little more accessible to people who maybe aren't flush to buy a novel at the drop of a hat, or who like to read their content online. So one of those is called The Immolation of Kev McGee. And it's at Clark's World. And I'll offer a link. So if you like that, but you would like to read something long in a softer version of that universe, I'm your guy.
Phoebe?
And I have my second co-edited anthology will be coming out September 1st, Almanac for the Anthropocene, a compendium of solarpunk futures. And that's actually a nonfiction collection that's trying to help us think about solarpunk as shifting from just fiction, to praxis. And that's available for pre-order right now, and it's coming out from West Virginia University Press. And like I said, it'll be out on September 1st.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been such a pleasure just to talk about and nerd about this topic with all of you. And thank you again for spending time with us and for sharing your experiences, knowledge, expertise, all these things, perspectives, all good. So just before we close, I would like to bring in Francesco to have a final word. But I think just as myself as moderator today, I wanted to thank especially our panelists and moderators whose native tongue is not English, and that they have very generously discussed in depth using a language that's not their mother tongue and without any complaint. So really appreciative, and thank you so much. So Francesco, I think, hello.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Steph. Well, this is just a moment of acknowledgement and saying thank you for all the people that helped to organize the first SolariseCon. We started this idea probably 5 or 6 months ago with conversation between Pavel and Steph, and then other people joined this path along these weeks and months. So it's really been a pleasure to work with you. My big thank goes to Pavel and Steph for the technical support and for helping to facilitate all the infrastructure that goes around the SolariseCon. Of course, the graphic and design of Commando Jugendstil. Thank you. The graphics are really stunning, awesome, really, really nice. And we will use the logos and things. So it's part of the SolariseCon concept. And then, of course, Martin and Steph for the support during all these weeks and conversation and inclusivity and invitation of people from many different continents, many different parts of the world and disciplines. This has been for me a very high level and inspiring moment. Almost one full day of the state of the art in Solarpunk writing, practices, thinking, designing, and technology. So I think we started something, and we want to continue this conversation on a global level, and we might see each other very soon. So thank you very much, and hope you will enjoy also the panels that we will be uploading soon on YouTube if you haven't seen them all. Okay, thank you very much.